So in part 2 of the integumentary system presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the accessory structures that we will find in the skin, such as hair, nails, and glands. As I mentioned in the last video, the integumentary system is very, very involved. So we're going to touch on some of the characteristics that make the integumentary so diverse. And first and foremost is going to be hair. It's important to know that hair is going to be found on all body surfaces except for thick skin. If you can remember in the last video, thick skin is found on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. Hair is also going to be made up of keratinized epidermal cells. When we say that a cell is keratinized, that just means that it's pumped full of the protein keratin, which makes structures very firm. So these cells are dead and pumped full of this protein keratin, and that's what's going to make up hair. And we'll see on this picture right here how hair is actually showing these different keratinized epidermal cells. These are just going to be sort of densely packed here. So this is a picture from an electron microscope that we can see of hair. And you can also see the scalp and how flaky that is going to be. This is going to be the stratum corneum layer, this outermost layer, and this is going to be made up of dead cells as well. So there's a few parts of hair. We have the hair shaft, which is going to be everything found above the skin. We have the hair follicle, which is everything found below the skin. And then part of the hair follicle is going to be the root. So the root is going to be the bulbous structure at the end of the hair follicle. This is going to have a few different parts to it, but what I really want you guys to focus on with hair is the types of hair. So we have three major types of hair. We have lanugo, we have the terminal hairs, and we have vellus hairs. Lanugo is going to be hair that covers the fetus. So any hair that can be found on the fetus will be lanugo, and you can see that this right here is going to be some lanugo that was left over. Terminal hairs are going to be the long, coarse, and heavily pigmented hairs. So these are the hairs on the tops of our heads, the hairs that grow in the armpit and the genital regions. For those of you that are males, these are the types of hairs that grow on your face that make your beard. So those are the terminal hairs. Lastly are the vellus hairs. These are the very, very fine and pale hairs. These don't have as much color. They are known as peach fuzz. The vellus hairs are peach fuzz, and you can see that these are ones that are actually going to be standing up here. So more so importantly than the hair root and the hair follicle, I want you to know the different types of hairs. That will take us into glands. There are lots of different glands that can be found in the integumentary system, and I definitely want you to feel comfortable with these glands for the next exam. The four types of glands we're going to cover this evening are the sebaceous glands. These are going to secrete oil. Eccrine sweat glands. This is a type of sweat gland, also known as a sudoriferous gland. We have apocrine sweat glands, which can also be called a sudoriferous gland, and we have ceruminous glands, which can be found in the external ear canal. So each of these types of glands is going to have a different secretion and be found in different places, and I want you to focus on where these glands are located as well as what their secretions are going to add to the integumentary system. So a few things I want to mention before we move from this slide are that the oil glands, or the sebaceous glands, will always be associated with hair follicles. You'll never see a sebaceous hand without a hair follicle at all. This is a hair follicle that we see, and a sebaceous gland that's associated on the side here. So sebaceous glands and hair follicles will always go together. Eccrine sweat glands are going to be the most common, and we actually will find these on all types of skin. Both thick skin and thin skin will both contain eccrine sweat glands. This is different from the sebaceous glands. There are no hair follicles that can be found on thick skin, and therefore, since there are no hair follicles found on thick skin, there will be no sebaceous glands that are found on thick skin. However, the eccrine sweat glands will be found on both thick and thin skin. These are the glands that are going to secrete when we get really hot. So the sweat glands, when you go outside and it's very warm outside and you start to sweat, those are going to be the eccrine sweat glands. These are found all over the body, and their function is to reduce the body's temperature and keep our body's temperature in a state of homeostasis. Apocrine sweat glands are going to be found in the axilla as well as the genital regions. So apocrine sweat glands are going to be found in these hairy skin areas. Ceruminous glands are specialized sweat glands, and they are located in the external ear canal. Ceruminous glands secrete a substance known as cerumen, which is just a fancy word for earwax. So let's take a look at each of these glands. We're going to first go over the distribution, or where these glands can be located, and then we're going to touch on what their functions are going to be. So again, make sure you feel comfortable with the distribution and the function of each of these different glands. This is important information for your test. So we'll start with the sebaceous glands. The sebaceous glands can be found in several places throughout the body. We can find those in the lips, the head of the penis, and the labia minora. However, what I really want you to focus on with these sebaceous glands are the fact that they are absent in palms and soles. We do not find sebaceous glands in our thick skin. This is how I'm going to want you to look at sebaceous glands. So sebaceous glands, again, are always going to be associated with a hair follicle. And because no hair can be found on thick skin, we will not find sebaceous glands on thick skin either. So we will find sebaceous glands concentrated in these areas, but we're going to find these in most places with the exception of our thick skin. The eccrine sweat glands are next. These are going to be found all over the body. However, they are especially concentrated at the skin of the forehead and in our thick skin. So palms and soles will have lots of eccrine sweat glands. So eccrine sweat glands are going to be found in both thin and thick skin. However, they tend to be more highly concentrated in thick skin. Apocrine sweat glands are going to be found at the skin of the axilla and the groin, so in the armpits and the genital region. Apocrine sweat glands are where we get the idea of nervous sweat. And the secretions of apocrine sweat glands are going to be a little different than eccrine sweat glands. So both eccrine and apocrine sweat glands fall under the category of what are known as sudoriferous glands, which are just sweat glands. And we just have two different types of sweat glands that secrete different secretions and have different purposes in our bodies. Lastly are the ceruminous glands. These are going to be found in the external auditory canal. So I want you to focus on where each of these are found. Can they be found in thick skin, or can they be found in thin skin, or can they be found in both? That's the idea of this slide. And that will take us into the functions of each of these glands. So let's talk about what the secretions of each of these glands are going to be adding to the body. So sebaceous glands are the oil glands. So what does oil do for the body? There's a few functions listed here, but sebaceous glands are going to keep things from drying out. As they secrete oil, oil and water aren't going to mix. So the oil is going to help to prevent the loss of water from hair, skin, and other areas of the body. We'll also have the inhibition of some bacterial growth as well. And this is going to be especially important on areas like the lips, where we will find sebaceous glands. Now, the eccrine sweat glands are going to be for thermoregulation. The purpose of these glands is to cool the body when our temperature goes too high. We're also going to have some degree of waste removal from our eccrine sweat glands as well. So again, remember, the eccrine sweat glands are found all over the body, and so we're going to be helping to remove waste from all areas of our body, as well as regulate the body's temperature in all areas of our body also. The apocrine sweat glands are going to be secreting during times of emotional stress. So this is where we get the idea of nervous sweats. Again, these are found in the armpits and the genital regions. So it will also make sense that these will secrete during times of sexual excitement. Lastly are the ceruminous glands. The ceruminous glands are secreting earwax, or as we will also call it, cerumen. This is going to prevent certain things from entering the external ear canal. The external ear canal is going to house the tympanic membrane. The tympanic membrane is the eardrum. And so we want to keep certain things that can damage the eardrum out of the external ear canal. So the ceruminous glands are also going to prevent the water loss from the external ear canal, and they're going to keep certain things from entering into the body by secreting that thick cerumen. On the right here, I'm showing you a picture of the nail in a few different parts. On the edge here, we have the free edge. We have the nail plate, which is just most of the nail as it's going to be attaching to the nail bed. We have the lunula, which is this lighter portion down here. The eponychium is another name for the cuticle, and the nail root is going to be what's ever found below the cuticle. That all being said, while the nails are very interesting parts of the body, all I really need you to know about the nails is that these are also going to be made of keratinized epidermal cells. So again, keratinized epidermal cells are just pumped filled with this protein keratin, and that's what's going to make nails very hard and rigid. So I've created this chart for you all to compare thin and thick skin. I've mentioned a lot during this video and the last video thick and thin skin and their importance. So let's take some time to go over where these two types of skin can be found and which structures can be found in each type of skin. So thin skin is found everywhere except for the palms and soles, and thick skin can only be found on the palms and the soles. So in thick skin, we're going to have more well-developed dermal papillae. So the epidermal ridges are going to be found more heavily in areas of thick skin. These are fingerprints. So fingerprints are going to be found more readily here on thick skin. There's not going to be as many epidermal ridges found in areas of thin skin. Hair follicles and their associated sebaceous glands are going to be present in thin skin, however not present in areas of thick skin. Sudoriferous glands, which are sweat glands, eccrine and apocrine glands, are going to be more concentrated in areas of thick skin. However, this is only true for the eccrine sweat gland. Remember, apocrine sweat glands can be found in areas of the axilla as well as the genital regions. So these sudoriferous glands are more so referring to our eccrine sweat glands, and these can be found all over the body. However, they're more highly concentrated in areas of thick skin. I did not cover sensory receptors as much in this presentation, but I will just take a second to mention that they are more densely going to be found in areas of thick skin. The thick skin areas of our bodies, such as the palms and the soles, are areas that receive more traffic and more contact with the external environment. So sensory receptors can be found more densely populating areas of thick skin, where we're going to need those sensory receptors in order to sense the external environment. So that will move us on to some of the functions of our skin. Now by this point, some of these are going to make a lot of sense to you, but some of these might seem a little bit more unclear. So let's take a second to mention the functions of the skin, and then I'll explain to each one of these. So thermal regulation. Thermal regulation is allowed by our eccrine sweat glands. Remember, the eccrine sweat glands are going to secrete sweat, and that's going to take heat off of the body. We also have a protective function. We've mentioned this several times. So the skin is serving a protective function to protect the inner parts of our body from the external environment. We'll have different sensors that can be found in our skin, such as the Merkel cell, which are going to be helping us to sense different stimuli that contacts the skin. So I've mentioned a few of these functions as we've gone here, but I haven't mentioned much about a blood reservoir. And I haven't mentioned a lot with the synthesis of vitamin D. So let's take some time to go over each and every one of these functions of our integumentary system. So as I have talked about, the eccrine sweat glands are secreting sweat to take heat off of our bodies. When sweat is evaporated off of our bodies, that takes heat with it. And that is one way that the integumentary system is going to help to thermal regulate our body and to keep our body's temperature in a balanced state of homeostasis. But there's actually one more way that our bodies can thermal regulate, and that is by increasing blood flow to the dermis. Remember, the dermis is a layer that is highly vascularized. The more blood that flows through the dermis, the more heat that's going to get transferred to the blood, and that blood is going to take the heat away. So that's going to help disperse heat throughout the body and take heat from the area of the integumentary system. So there are actually two ways by which we can have thermal regulation due to the integumentary system. The integumentary system also serves as a blood reservoir. So what this means is that our integumentary system can hold large amounts of blood. So since the dermis is so highly vascularized, it can hold about 8 to 10% of all of the adult's blood flow. So that's roughly a tenth of all the blood in the body that can be found in the dermis. So if some areas were needing more blood, we could actually call on the dermis to release some of this blood to go to those other areas. So a blood reservoir is also going to be a function of the integumentary system. As we've talked about in great detail by this point, is that the integumentary system is going to give us a protective function. And there's lots of ways by which the integumentary system does this. So, for example, intraepidermal macrophages, also known as Langerhans cells, are going to be patrolling the body to detect different pathogens that have made their way in, and it's going to destroy those pathogens. So this is one way that the integumentary system will play into the immune system. But we also have some other ways that the integumentary system can provide protection for the body. Let's think back to melanin, which is produced by melanocytes and passed on to keratinocytes. Melanin is absorbing UV radiation and UV light, and so melanin is going to be protecting us from accumulating damage from UV radiation. Sweat is also going to be fairly acidic, so this is going to destroy certain bacteria that's going to be found on the skin that could have potentially caused us harm. Keratin is another example. This is going to make our skin more firm, and so this is going to create a more solid barrier between us and the external environment. And as I mentioned with sebaceous gland, sebum, which is the secretion of oil from our sebaceous glands, this is going to prevent some bacterial growth. So there's more than one way that our integumentary system provides us protection. The skin is a nice protective suit that we get to wear all the time. We will also have lots of sensory receptors that can be found in the skin. Now, we will cover these in much more greater detail in Chapter 16. However, there are certain sensors that can be found in the skin that will allow us to sense touch, pressure, vibration. All of these different sensations are coming from sensors found in the integumentary system. We get warm and cool sensations as well. So by feeling a painful thermal sensation, this gives us the ability to move away from that stimulus to avoid any major type of tissue damage. So our sense of touch is so vital for our body's function. We need to be able to sense those things that are around us. We need to be able to sense different temperature sensations and different touch sensations as well. Sharp is a touch sensation. That's going to be one that we're going to want to feel. Again, we have these cutaneous sensations to protect our body from any type of damaging stimuli that we might be imposing upon our bodies. Excretion and absorption are two more functions of the integumentary system. So thinking about sweat glands and oil glands, that's where excretion is going to come in. We're going to need to be able to eliminate certain substances from our bodies. We have waste products that can be found that accumulate in our bodies, and some of these can be released through the skin. However, the skin also serves an absorptive function. Absorption is essentially the ability for us to bring things into our bodies. And with certain drugs, our skin's absorptive function allows us to administer drugs through the skin, and that is what is known as transdermal drug administration. You might be wondering why we would want to administer drugs through the skin. Well, because it's very, very minimally invasive. It's a lot easier to put a patch on the skin that contains a certain drug rather than giving it by injection or taking a pill. Drug administration is one thing that we actually consider very, very highly in the clinical scenario and in the medical realm when new drugs are coming to the market. So if we can administer a drug through the skin, that is going to be very minimally invasive, and it's not going to cause a lot of inconvenience to our patient. So transdermal drug administration is allowed because of the skin's wonderful absorptive function. The last function of the integumentary system that we're going to cover is the synthesis of vitamin D. Vitamin D plays a very important role in the body. Vitamin D will aid in the absorption of calcium. We cannot normally absorb calcium into our bodies through the digestive system unless vitamin D is attached to it. So the synthesis of vitamin D is another integral function of the integumentary system. So how does the integumentary system make vitamin D? So when ultraviolet rays from the sun contact our skin, that's going to activate the precursor form of vitamin D into the active form of vitamin D, which can also be known as calcitriol. Just by going out in the sun, these ultraviolet rays are going to activate vitamin D, and that's going to allow us to absorb calcium into our bodies. And you only need to go in the sun about 15 minutes twice a week in order to get as much vitamin D as you will need. So this is another wonderful function of the integumentary system. Since calcium is used for so many of our other body systems, vitamin D synthesis is extremely, extremely necessary, our body's homeostasis. So vitamin D synthesis is another extremely important function of the integumentary system. So as we stick with our common theme throughout this semester, we're going to talk about some changes that occur within the integumentary system as the result of aging. So as we're all aware, wrinkles are going to occur. The epidermis is going to lose a lot of elastic tissue, and it's going to become a little bit looser. We're also going to have a lot more dehydration. The water is not going to stay in the integumentary system as well as it once did. Sweat production will decrease over time, so we'll have less sweat production as we get older. We're going to have a decrease in thickness in the skin, and nails are going to become a lot weaker. The active numbers of our skin cells is also going to decrease. So we'll have fewer melanocytes, and this is going to produce less melanin, which results in gray hair and atypical skin pigmentation. So there's a lot of changes that occur, but again, keep in mind that these changes are normal, and they're going to occur to all of us as we age. So the last major topics in the integumentary system that I'd like to cover are going to be the pathological conditions that are associated with the integumentary system. So first and foremost is skin cancer. Skin cancer is a very, very serious condition. However, it can often be treated if it is caught early. The primary cause of skin cancer is excessive exposure to the sun. So the sun emits a lot of ultraviolet light, which can be very, very helpful in small doses, as we saw with vitamin D synthesis. However, if we get too much of this ultraviolet light from the sun, this can eventually cause skin cancer. One of the other causes of skin cancer are tanning salons. So there's a lot of ultraviolet light that is emitted at tanning salons. So you want to be careful. If you are someone who enjoys going to tanning salons, you want to be careful to limit your exposure to these places. And you always want to make sure to wear sunscreen when you go outside. So there are 3 types of cancer that we're going to cover in this class: basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and malignant melanoma. So let's see how these 3 different types of skin cancer differ. We're going to start with basal cell carcinoma. And before I get into the characteristics of basal cell carcinoma, I just want to mention this word malignant. When a cancer is malignant, that means it's very, very dangerous and it spreads very quickly. So if it's malignant, it's very, very bad, and it's very, very dangerous. If it's benign, that means that it's not going to cause a lot of harm. So basal cell carcinoma, of all these different types of cancers, is going to be the least malignant, which means that it will pose the least amount of threat to the patient. This will also be the most common type of skin cancer that we will see. So each of these cancers is named by where the cancer originates from, which layer of the skin is going to start off being cancerous. And basal cell carcinoma is appropriately named because cells in the stratum basal are going to be where this cancer will begin. So basal cell carcinoma will originate in the cells of the stratum basal. So the stratum basal is this single layer, the last layer of the epidermis, or the deepest layer of the epidermis. And these cells in the stratum basal are going to invade the dermis and the hypodermis. You can see here with basal cell carcinoma, these cells are going to become cancerous and they're going to start moving down towards the dermis. So fortunately, basal cell carcinoma rarely will metastasize, which means that it will enter the bloodstream and spread out. So it rarely enters the bloodstream and spreads out. That's what metastasizes means. So cancers that metastasize are going to be a lot more dangerous, and basal cell carcinoma will rarely do this. Most of the basal cell carcinoma seen in hospitals and doctors' offices can be cured with treatment, especially if it's caught early. But as we will see, is some of these cancers, if not caught early enough, can prove fatal. Our second type of cancer is squamous cell carcinoma. Squamous cell carcinoma is going to originate from keratinocytes that can be found in the stratum spinosum. So while basal cell carcinoma originated from the stratum basal, the squamous cell carcinoma will originate from the stratum spinosum. And you can remember that the stratum spinosum is where these originate because spinosum starts with an S, and so does squamous here. So that's how we can remember where squamous cell carcinoma is going to originate from. Now these will rapidly grow and metastasize. So these are going to be a lot more dangerous than the basal cell carcinoma. So it's very, very important that we catch this early in our patients. With early detection, we can typically cure squamous cell carcinoma. However, as time progresses, metastasis becomes more likely. When a cancer metastasizes, it enters the bloodstream and spreads throughout our entire body. And then we're going to have cancer cells all over our bodies. And that can be very, very damaging. So it's important to catch this cancer before it has metastasized and spread it all over the body. Our last type of cancer that we're going to talk about is the malignant melanoma. And this is by far going to be the most dangerous type of cancer. This is not the type of cancer that you want to get. Malignant melanoma is a very, very deadly cancer because it will be highly metastatic. This type of cancer will very often metastasize. And not only will this metastasize very readily, this will also resist chemotherapy, which is one of our treatments for cancer. So fortunately, this is one of our more rare types of cancer. Only 5% of skin cancers are going to be this malignant melanoma. However, it is the most deadly because 50% of the people that get malignant melanoma are set to recover. However, the other 50 are not going to be so lucky. So malignant melanoma are going to arise from the melanocytes in the layer of the stratum basal. So melanocytes are the cells that make melanin, and that's how we will remember this. Melanocytes for melanoma. Melanoma will often present with many different colors, very irregular borders, and an asymmetrical cancerous spot. You can see that lots of these pictures are just very, very different mixtures of colors and shapes, and that's what melanoma will often look like. So here we're going to actually talk about how we will diagnose different types of cancers. How can we determine if something is malignant or if it's benign? And that will take us into our ABCs of cancer diagnosis. So each one of these letters is going to indicate, A, B, C, D, E, that each one of these letters is going to indicate a different word that we're going to look for with cancerous spots. So the ABCs of cancer diagnosis stand for asymmetry, borders, color, diameter, and evolving. These are going to be the 5 criteria that we want to look for when diagnosing a cancerous spot. So first and foremost is asymmetry. If we have a skin spot, we want it to be symmetrical. You can see that this is a normal mole here, and this is fairly symmetrical. No matter how we slice a line through this particular spot, it's going to be fairly symmetrical on either side of that line. However, with malignant melanoma, if we were to slice that line in this direction, we would get 2 different shapes on either side. We have 2 different colors, and this whole spot would not be symmetrical. And however you slice this spot, it's not going to look symmetrical. So asymmetry is a bad thing. You want your spots to be symmetrical. Borders refer to a nice, crisp, clear border on the outside. Does it look as though this mole is contained, or does it look as though this might be spreading? You can see that this is a very, very clear, demarcated line between the spot and the skin itself. Over here with malignant melanoma, the lines are a little less clear. You can see that some areas might have a little bit of a clearer line than others, but around the entire spot, there's not necessarily a clear border. So we want to see a very clear border with our skin spots. Color is going to be the C in our ABCs for cancer diagnosis. We want our spots to have the same color, and that's where malignant melanoma is really going to show. Malignant melanoma is going to have lots of different colors. And again, I'll go back to this slide to show you that some spots are going to be a lot darker than others. Some spots are going to be a little bit lighter than others. And so color is also going to be indicative of how malignant a cancer spot is. The fewer colors, the better. We want our spot to be uniform throughout. That's what we're looking for with skin spots. We want our spot to be uniform throughout. If you have any difference in color, any difference in the border, or the shape of the overall spot, we want to make sure that we get these checked. Diameter is going to represent the D in our ABCs for cancer diagnosis. The smaller diameter, the better. The larger a spot is, the further that spot has spread. So again, when we see these spots appear, we want to make sure we're catching them early when they are small and when they have not started changing color. Lastly, for cancer diagnosis is evolving. How often is this spot going to be changing? Is this going to be changing day to day, or is it going to be fairly the same over the course of a long period of time? So these are our ABCs for cancer diagnosis. I'd like you to know what each of these letters will stand for, which word is represented by each of these letters, and why we use these. Next, we're going to talk about burns. Most often when we think of burns, we think of some type of tissue damage caused by heat. But there are other things that can also cause burns to our skin. So electricity can cause burns through our skin. Radioactivity or a particular chemical can cause damage to our skin. These chemicals can denature proteins that can be found in the skin, and that's going to break down the tissue. So there's lots of things that can cause a burn, but no matter what caused the burn, we grade burns the same way according to which layers of the skin have been damaged. So there are first-degree burns, second-degree burns, and third-degree burns. Just these 3 types. First-degree burns refer to some type of damage that only affects the epidermis. Only the epidermis was affected by a first-degree burn. So sunburn is a good example of a first-degree burn. Living in Florida, of all places, makes us a little bit more susceptible to sunburn. Second-degree burns refer to some type of damage to the epidermis as well as the dermis. So part of the dermis is going to be damaged with a second-degree burn. And second-degree burns will always show blisters because there was damage to the dermis, which is going to contain lots of blood vessels. So blisters are very characteristic of second-degree burns, and that's actually why we use blisters as an example, is because when the dermis is affected, that will form blisters. Third-degree burns are when we have damaged the entire epidermis, the entire dermis, and we've now left the subcutaneous layer open. So that hypodermis is also going to remain damaged with third-degree burns as well. So we grade burns based on their severity. How many layers of the skin and which layers have been affected by the burn. Lastly here, we're going to mention pressure ulcers. So pressure ulcers become increasingly more frequent as we get older. Think back to the age-associated changes that I told you about the integumentary system a few slides ago. Skin is going to get a lot more weak and a lot more thin. And so this is going to allow for weak spots that can be found within our integumentary system, especially on areas that are constantly going to be experiencing some type of constant pressure or next to some type of bony projection. As we put pressure from some bone or some hard spot onto an area of the skin, that's going to constantly decrease blood flow to that area of the skin. And if we decrease blood flow, that's going to result in a pressure ulcer. So these do more commonly occur on elderly patients that are bedridden. We will call them bed sores, because these can form in areas of the skin that are squeezed between the bed and some hard bony projection. So these are going to be our last and final pathological condition of the integumentary system. So that will conclude our Chapter 5 lecture video. If you have any questions, by all means reach out, and I will see you guys in the next video for Chapter 6.